Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And it's a lot of fun, a lot of excitement. But when Daniel, we were talking about getting ready for this conference, and he told me that basically I have one job. My job is to keep you guys awake when the chocolate cake kicks in. So I'm going to try to do that, and we're going to do that in a couple of different ways. But the first thing I need to do is tell you that I've got a confession to make. My confession, and it's kind of hard to do this in front of such a spiritual group, but I am a recovering engineer. Now, that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but you just need to know that because as we go through this presentation, I'll probably geek out at some point. And things that maybe aren't very important to you will seem important to me, but I'm hoping I can bring those things around and do it in a way that applies to all of you. Now, as far as keeping you guys engaged for making sure the cake doesn't kick in too badly, I just want you to know that the things I'm talking about, I believe are so important that every one of you, if you're a human and you interact with other humans, you're going to benefit from what I'm about to show you. So make sure the coffee is there, the cake doesn't kick in too much, maybe put it off to a little bit later, because you're going to want to connect to some of these things I'm going to tell you. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to need a little bit of help. I need 3 volunteers, and I need actually 3 different types of people. First one I'm going to call member A. This is an artistic person, somebody that's a creative type. Somebody that might be able to be a little bit artistic, think out of the box, colors are important, those kinds of things. So who is a volunteer that be creative? And then I know that volunteering is hard. Great, I got one. What's your name? Andres? Okay, A for Andres, that makes it easy. A for artistic. So help me remember that because I'm going to come back to this in a little bit. The second person I need is an analytical type, or in this case, I'm going to say B for boss. So I need somebody that maybe has been a supervisor, that knows how to make decisions, to criticize, because that's what bosses do, right? I forgot your name. Dan. Okay, Dan, so you're number B or member B. And the final one is C for CEO. So are there anybody here that runs a company that might be willing to come up on the stage with me in a little bit? And I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Nicole. Okay, so Nicole, you're member C for CEO, and I'll be calling you guys up. So you've got a few minutes to regret your decision for doing that, because there's volunteer and there's voluntold, and the good news is I don't have to tell anybody here today, so that's a good thing. Now, as we look forward to this process, and Chris has already brought this up, Romans 12:2 for transformation. We're here to talk about transforming our city, transforming our workplaces, transforming the people that interact with us. Romans 12:2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's what we're here about. Now, as Christians, I think we've all been transformed. As Christians, we all continue to be transformed through the sanctification process. But when I think about transformation, I think about y'all. Y'all are here to make a difference. You see, you can tell I was a Texan, right? All y'all is even better. You're here to make a difference in our city, and you're here and you have the leverage to make that difference. You have the leverage through your employees, through your customers, through the platform that you have in business to make a difference, to transform our city, our state, and ultimately our country. That's an opportunity you don't want to waste. Now, we've had some great inspiration from our previous speakers, but I'm going to talk about a couple of things. One practical thing, which for me was perhaps the most important thing I learned, and then the other aspects after that. It's really a 2-part talk. We're going to talk about the one thing I want you to know, and then we're going to talk about a tool, which I think is pretty cool. They're interrelated, but not exactly the same thing. So here's the problem. When we talk about transformation, it also, by definition, implicates change. Now, show of hands, those of you that are still awake, how many of you like change? That many. Okay. About 15% of you, that's pretty high for a normal room to like change. And we're going to talk about you here in a minute because the rest of us pretty much hate you. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, again, keep you awake. I want everybody to stand up. Now I want you to find a partner, preferably somebody you don't already know. Now I know that may be hard in this room because you ought to do, but and you guys have even in odd tables, but partner up, just find somebody real quick. We're going to have about a 2-minute exercise. Don't get too friendly because you got to listen to the instructions. Okay, you ready? Okay, so here's your instructions. Stop being friendly, first of all. No having fun. You're standing up, the blood's flowing, that's good. You'll get to sit down again in a minute. 2, I want you to do 4 things with your partner. You have 1 minute each, so don't waste your time. If you don't know each other, introduce yourself. Second thing is to tell your partner what is the biggest change that you have encountered in the last 12 months. Third thing, pretend you have a big dial on your chest. It goes from 0 to 10. 0 means that change is fresh, it's painful, probably painful, not always painful, but it's brand new and you're just starting to acclimate it into your life. 5 means, okay, I'm there in my life, it's part of my life, I'm not necessarily happy with it. 10 means, okay, it's my new normal. So your name, what your change was, what the number is on that dial in your chest, and the 4th thing is how long has it been since to get to that number. In other words, if say you lost a spouse 6 months ago, and that's really kind of a 1 or 2 still, even though it's been 6 months. So do your best to calibrate that. It's subjective. Don't overanalyze it. Just share that with your partner. Go. Okay, so now I want you to answer for your partner. How many of your partners scored a number of, say, 0 to 2? Raise your hand. So things were very fresh, change in their life. Okay, how about 3 to 6? How many of them were 3 to 6? And how about 7 to 10? So a fair number of people have been going through change but doing okay with it. That's good. Now the number of the time, how long did they take? Just let's say 1 to 3 months is the first one. Okay, 3 to 6 months? Over a year? How many over a year? Okay, pretty good number. Okay, so the first thing I want you to notice as you did this, you talked to this, everybody in this room is going through change. Sometimes it's a traumatic change, sometimes it's beneficial change, but every time they have a change, it kind of rocks their life. And here's what I'm going to get to is the surprise of how long that commonly is. You might, in your business, have one of these guys. Hopefully you can all read it. Sims, your reaction to every workplace change has become too predictable. And his answer is, but we used to do it this way. Any of you work with that guy? Most of us here are business leaders. You may be having this meeting in a business, and I want to say it's equally applicable in your church, in your nonprofit. But we're hoping to have you lead us on our journey of transformation without requiring any real changes. That's pretty much, I bet you if you've been in a meeting, you've probably had that meeting and that person. And so today, to go on to the thing, what I say is, I title this talk as the single most important leadership principle that I believe I learned in my tenure as a business leader. And this applies to your business, to your church. I suspect many of you are church leaders. It applies to your life. It applies to your kids. And here's the deal. This is the key thing. If you take nothing else away from today than this one thing, I'll be happy. Here it is. Can anybody relate to that? You buy into it? We can be done real fast and go on to more dessert if everybody agrees. But here's what I want to tell you. I'm going to convince you by the time we're done today that this is probably more true than you realize. This is takes longer and is harder than you ever did it. And as a leader in particular, because you guys are all leaders, you probably don't appreciate how hard it is for the people that you're leading. So my goal today is to show you that and to convince you of why it's true. And then as leaders, of course, we have to deal with it. And ideally, if we're going to lead companies and organizations, we need to do it in a way that minimizes the impact and maximizes that love for the employees and the people that we're working with. So here's the question. I know we had a little bit of a survey, but what would you say is the time it takes, the average time for a substantive change to be accepted by employees and integrated into an organization? Yell it out. This is not a hypothetical. Never. Well, 18 months, 3 years. Anybody else say? Having an input? 5 years. So you guys have screwed up my whole talk. Normally, I've asked several hundred people this question over the last several years, and the typical response is 30 to 60 days. And as most of our leaders, that's why, until Gary, the biggest response I ever got in a talk was 7 years. Now he's said forever. We never adapt to it. And I'm going to talk about that guy here in a minute as well. But most people, I think, particularly leaders, will say 30 to 60 days, they should be over it. And what I want to tell you today is that's not true. Somebody said it 18 months. 18 months is the average time it takes for a substantive change to be assimilated, integrated, and to be a new normal in this case. Now this comes from a lot of the grief research from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Those of you that have been to counseling or in counseling, faced a loss of a loved one, you've probably experienced this process, which they summarize with an acronym DABDA. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. We go through that change. In the course of business, organizational dynamics, I like this curve better. It's done by two guys named Scott and Jaffe. It's called the Scott and Jaffe change model. So when we talk about that 18 months, here's what I want you to look at, is the y-axis is productivity and morale. So 100% means we're operating on all cylinders. The higher you are on that axis, the better from an organizational standpoint. The x-axis is time. So when we have a change event, is the beginning of this line, and quite often employees will go through this process, which they define as denial, resistance. Okay, first of all, the boss didn't really say that. Second of all, okay, the boss said it, but I'm not going to go along with it. After a while, the boss hasn't given up, so I'm going to explore. Exploration is the bottom right quadrant. And then, okay, as things go and are okay, and I guess I may have to accept it, and he's not going to change his mind, which quite often happens, I'm going to get committed and I'm on board with it. My morale and my productivity as an organization is back up to the top right-hand quadrant. So as leaders of people, you need to understand that every time you implement a change into an organization, the people around you are going through this. Now, they have different levels of magnitude, different levels of change. But the 18 months is this. Now, here's my engineer. This is one of the most beautiful charts there ever was. Now, I know that's not true for everybody from an artistic perspective, but as an engineer, we know that people are typically represented by a Gaussian distribution, a normal curve, and it has some very unique math probabilities that are representations that are important. So whenever we talk about people, particularly large numbers of people, any given specific metric will be represented by a Gaussian curve like this. Now, I've put 18 months at the center of that curve. And we're going to camp out on this a little bit because this is one of the things I need you to take away for today, for your own leadership skills and acceptance, is that first thing you look at that, 18 months is the middle. This kind of a curve, the mean, the median are both the same. And when you get to 18 months, half the people are on board. So this curve is saying, how have they accepted the change? Have they got through the Scott-Jaffe change curve model, and how long did it take them to do it? And as a leader, 18 months, they're halfway there. Now, I think, Chad, you became president of FCCI a little over 12 months ago, right? So you're not to the halfway point there. Your employees are likely still trying to figure out if they can trust you. You're the new leader, you're shaking things up. We brought Aragon 412. Boy, I'm not so sure about this. Now, they may say the right things, they may act the right ways, but as leaders, we need to know that they're not fully on board yet. Now, unless you have a whole bunch of them that are thrive on change, which occasionally that can happen in an organization, but usually not. Now, next step on this, I want you to notice what I call the majority middle. So majority middle is basically going to take you from 12 months to 24 months. So during that time, you're going to win the hearts and souls of most of the people in your organization. But that still means it takes till 12 months to get started with no other types of interventions. Excuse me. On the other side, what I call the left-siders. These are the guys that thrive on change. Again, I think we saw 5 or 6 of you that raised your hand when I asked if you liked change. These are the guys that like change. And again, I want you to know that you're kind of like the morning person that comes bouncing down the stairs and says, oh, the sun is shining, this is great, and you're saying this to your colleagues before they've had their second or third cup of coffee. You really annoy them. Your cheerfulness of being a morning person just goes against the grain of everybody else. By the same token, if you like change, if you thrive on change and you want to get those things going, you're probably really annoying all those other people around you, and they tolerate you. But that's a good thing, because that's a good thing. Now, if you're really lucky as a leader, you've got a couple of these guys. I've named them Chip and Dale. You can't hard to see them in the light here, but Chip and Dale are what I call cheerleaders. Cheerleaders are the guys that look at that change. They tend to be younger. They're going to look at the change and they're going to talk about all the cool new things that something's doing. So let's pretend we just rolled out a new software system into the company. They're going to say, look at this neat thing that the software does now, and look at how we do this and how much easier this is. The rest of the curve is looking at it and saying, this is different. It doesn't work the way it used to, and it's hard every time I try to do something. Chip and Dale are your cheerleaders. You always want some of those guys. So left-siders, change thrivers, and cheerleaders are the way you want to characterize those. All of y'all, by the definition that you are here today, are probably in this category. Leaders will be more acclimated to change, more willing to accept change, and more willing to be part of change than the general rank and file that you work with. So congratulations on that, but recognize that you're that person that is the morning person, and the people around you aren't, because that's critical for what we're about to talk about in a minute. And then there's the right-siders. I call this guy Moaning Melvin. So Melvin is the guy that is very vocal. He talks at the water cooler about the bad new software changes. He is the one that has the ear. He's probably been around for quite a while, and he really doesn't like any change. If he's an extreme right-sider, which Moaning Melvins tend to be, he probably will never change. So Gary with forever, that's Melvin. Melvin will never be happy with the change that's there. Now here's the bad news as leaders. He's a squeaky wheel. What do we do with squeaky wheels? We want to oil them, right? We want the noise to stop. We want to make them happy. But what I want to tell you right now is that you will never give Melvin enough oil. Now, if he's in your organization, he quite often is a process expert. He may be the guy that knows how to get the product out. He may be the guy that knows how to solve the problems, to work the computer system, to turn the screws in the right place so that the widget works. And you are at risk as a leader from a business perspective. So your question, your problem that you need to be thinking about is Melvin on the right bus, or should he be on another bus? And if you're going to get him off the bus, how are you going to replace that function? Your organization is at risk when you've got a Melvin on the right side and he's a key process expert. The other option is maybe he's on the right bus, but he's in the wrong seat. And you need to work that process, which means, of course, you got to do that. But as we're talking about that change acceptance curve, I want you to know Melvin is a waste of your time. I much want you to work on the middle of this curve rather than on Melvin, even though he's squeaky. Pretty soon, if everybody else moves, Melvin will give up. Now here's the big deal. You guys are the leaders, what I call the leadership time skew. So you'll see two things. When you look at this curve, all of you as leaders have two things. You have a narrower curve because you're on the left side. It doesn't take you as long to acclimate to change. It's a much smaller curve because leaders, there's fewer of you than that. But here's what happens in a leadership situation. A leader is in charge of taking the organization forward. By taking forward, you almost always have to implement change. Now, as a leader, you may be doing the change process by yourself. You may be working with a small leadership team. But at some point, you've come up with the idea. You've come up with a solution. You've worked through it, maybe worked with your team about saying, what do we need to do? And you've been working on this for at least a month, probably, maybe up to 6 months. In a big organization and a big change, it could be a year. So you have started your curve 1 to 6 months out, and then the change event happens, and you're the one instigating the change. Now, there's a lot of change management techniques. I'm going to talk about one of them. All of them are good, and all of them are beneficial. But once you roll this change event out, maybe it's the new software system, maybe you're reorganizing things, maybe you're shutting down a product. My company, we had trouble emotionally letting go of products that we loved, even though they weren't business viable anymore. And that's a change. Here's what happens. This is your team on change. So now we have this change event. We now start the change curve for your team. Now you can see there's a problem here. You're through your change curve. And in fact, what really happens is when you start leading your team, you have a change curve. Your change curve paradigm gets overlaid onto their change curve. And unless you recognize this 18-month and longer curve for your team, you end up saying, this idea just isn't getting traction. How many of you have been in a church or a larger company business that has rolled out a new program and about 3 months later, it gets abandoned? Any of you? So usually it gets abandoned because it doesn't seem to be getting traction. And what I want you to know as a leader, whether a business, church, nonprofit, this is the problem. Your team wants to succeed. I'm a big believer in good intentions. Now, you may sit in there, those guys are resisting, they're just not on the team. The reality is they're dealing with that internal turmoil about change. And in 3 months, you can see that we've just barely gotten past the cheerleader section of those things. Big companies are notorious for this. They'll bring in a consultant, they'll roll out a new thing, and about 3 months later, they're doing a new thing because they can never seem to get traction. The CEO is saying, we got to change things. This isn't working. So the team just must not be smart enough. Or maybe it's the wrong answer. But the reality is they're just getting up on that curve and they want to be there, and you switch tracks on them just before it happens. The other thing that happens is that you're going along, and sometimes a boss has a reputation for the new bright shiny object. He went to a seminar, a conference, he came to the FCCI conference, came back with a great idea, instantly rolled it out the organization, and the team just basically looks at it and say, okay, yeah, thanks, boss. We're not going to do anything because we know a month from now, 2 months from now, you're going to change it again, and therefore we're going to passively, aggressively resist. But they're doing that because you have been through this process. You've been doing this in the past, given up on them, and then rolled on to the next one. And so now that's a pattern that just self-perpetuates. So the result is I'd like you to take away a few key lessons about this impact. As I said, I believe this 18-month rule, we now have that as a rule in our group. Now, I don't know if Pepper Espinosa is here, but she is part of our group and one of my victims when I first developed this talk of saying, here's the 18-month rule. We've got to go through 18 months before we're going to do that or manage it to be better. The result was she came into a meeting one time, sat down with a big sigh, and said, I hate the 18-month rule. Because she had been dealing with that in her company and saying, we got to get this change there, but I can't get them past that. Now, we're going to talk about a few ways that you might be able to do that, but as a leader, here's what I want you to take away. You've been thinking about it, your team has not. You've had that 1 to 6 month runway that they don't have. So you need to give them the privilege of getting on the runway with you. You need to manage them in ways that you can help them get on that runway further, whatever it is. Now, it, of course, is variable and subjective. So the death of a spouse is obviously bigger and more impactful than, say, the death of your hunting dog. The death of your hunting dog is probably more impactful than the death of your goldfish, unless you're a 2-year-old, and of course then it's a pretty big deal. The death of your cat, well, nobody really cares about cats, right? So maybe that wasn't a good example. Now don't go sending letters. I'm a dog person, but it's okay. So on the personal sphere, those changes, of course, loss of a loved one is really the big side of the curve. And that curve goes out, instead of 18 months, maybe it's 36 months before you can assimilate all that issue. On the side of business, what are some business idea changes? So I talked about a new software system. Yell out a couple other things that could happen in business that cause turmoil and change. Say it again? Doing a reorg, giving guys new assignments, messing with their rice bowl. They're good at it over here, but no, I got a new job. I don't even know if I can do it. What else? People quitting. In some ways, that's an organizational change by default. How about people being fired? That can be traumatic too, especially if they don't think that person should be fired. Anything else? Relocation. Sometimes just relocating from one desk to the other desk. I lost my window. Now, one of the ones people quite often overlook is changing the candy bars in the machine. That can be a big deal. It can take a long time to be okay with that. Be thinking about those magnitudes as the leader. Those are the things that impact you. If it's going to take 18 months, what do you have to do? You got to keep preaching it. So it's change. You've been thinking about it. Your team has not. You've got to keep preaching it. You've got to stick with the program. Don't give up after 3 months. Give it 6 months at least, because then you can start seeing the traction instead of giving up just as your team is getting traction. I want you to not invest in Melvin. Think about that curve with the majority middle. If you can move the majority middle from 18 months to 6 months, that has huge leverage. You're leveraging 90% of your team to go from 18 months to 6 months instead of one guy to go from never to maybe someday. Melvin is not where you need to invest your energy. As leaders, your time is the single most important non-renewable resource of your organization. Leaders can't be replaced. They can't be hired. Nobody is irreplaceable, but there's no way that as a leader you're going to snap things and your time can get replaced. You've got 24 hours in a day. Hopefully you need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to spend time with your family. So you have a defined amount of energy, bandwidth, and time that you can invest in this organization. Don't invest it in Melvin, no matter how squeaky he is. Recognize that your team members do have different rates of acceptance. You got to know, in fact, I encourage you when you sit down with your team, score them. You probably know your team, what number they are, how fast they are, which one of them are the cheerleaders, which are the left-siders, which are the right-siders, and think about that consciously as you're going along. Now, if there is any good news to this whole story, the good news is 18 months from now, more than half of the company has now accepted it, whatever you're changing, as the new normal. As you have new team members come on, they are now coming into the new normal. They're not the ones that have to be convinced. It's the current guys that are going. Now, the really bad news is I've been talking about single event changes, but what is our world today? Our world is changing at a faster pace than we have ever seen. And so you've got this picture of Gaussian changes, people being accepted at different levels, and some guys are not even over the first change before the next one hits. And so they're always struggling with that morale question. Change management techniques, there's lots and lots of them out there. A lot of them involve communication, and I think all of them are good. I encourage you to research those things as leaders. But what I'd like to talk about today is one in specific that I kind of like for a number of reasons. And that is using your company culture as part of that process. Now, Chad talked about culture last night, had a definition of that, and what I want to do is use culture as the framework for helping you manage this 18-month rule. Instead of being 18 months, maybe it's 12 months, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 3 months. Anything you can do to improve that number as a leader is going to benefit your organization. So recognizing that this curve exists, that you can work with it, and ideally creating a systemized way, which I'm going to propose to you as your culture, is the best way to do that. So here's my definition of organizational culture: the formal and informal ecosystem of people, behaviors, policies, attitudes, and decision-making that determine the look, feel, smell, and actions of your organization when no one's looking. My mama used to say integrity is what you do when nobody's looking, or when you know you can't get caught. Same kind of thing. Your culture is going to drive your team's decision-making process to make the right decisions for your organization when you're not there. That's what you want. You want a system, a DNA of making the right choices for your organization. Now, culture is important. Cultures exist. If you don't know what your culture is, ask your team. They can tell you. It can be productive, it can be negative, it can be toxic. There's an organization called Best Christian Workplace that will do surveys for you in your organization. I heard a story once where the Gideons, I believe it was, engaged them, came back in the ministry, of course, where everybody's pulling on the same team, has a higher purpose, and everybody is doing right. They had this survey done, and it came back they were a toxic organization. So I want you to know that you may not know what your organizational culture is, but you are responsible for it as a leader. Now, cultures can change. You can guide them, you can change them, but very few of them self-direct to a higher plane. So the law of entropy, there's the engineer part again, the law of people, the law of sin tells us that you got to have positive input to have things change. Moaning Melvin never goes away. Melvin is going to be working to destroy your culture, not intentionally, but just by who he is. And you've got to manage that and make it work better. Now, culture requires leadership. That's where you guys come in. Your staff is watching you. They know what you want, what you expect. Maybe not what you say, but they know what happens in reality. If you think that that's not true, then you're deceiving yourself. So the process that I would like to encourage you, and we're going to have to start talking much faster here, is using cultural transformation through a number of things, and starting with the process of core values, mission, vision, cultural beliefs, whatever you want to call them. For too many companies, these are lists of things on the walls. But I want to help you look at doing a thing that will help you make it happen. Now, if I can have my volunteers start making their way on up here. But you have a choice of letting your culture happen or guiding your culture. So come on up, guys. Don't be shy. You'll have to train your managers. You'll have to work on these things. Thank you, thank you. Come on up. Artist right here. Well, just have a seat. Have a seat. There's a lot of different ways to work on this. You probably want to work on a buy-in process as opposed to a mandated process, but sometimes requirements say that you just do things as the owner, as the boss. Here's a couple of examples. Cultural beliefs. I worked for my last career ended up being in a publicly held major medical company. This company brought 100 of us leaders together from all over the world, and we spent 2 days, 1,600 man hours, plus travel time, and probably $100,000 of travel expenses to come up with this. It was so important to the company at the time that they made that investment to come up with these things. Now, as believers in business isn't maybe not the best example. Look ahead, align decisions, lead actively, play to win, own the results, and recognize excellence. All nice aspirations. As believers in business, FCCI and related organizations, I think we have a little bit higher purpose calling that would end up in ours. This is one that I like, a company called Voss Lighting. They've got a division here in town. They've got a business mission and a biblical mission. We sell to tell. This is a key list of one of my member companies was going through an exercise to develop together their core values as a company: integrity, growth, motivation, dependability, giving, knowledgeable, honesty, faith, ethics, and love. I had a story to talk about this, but I don't have time. FCCI has core values. If you're a member, you should know those because this is the organization you're a part of and representing. And starting with the course that we all, I think, would buy into is that God is the owner. We are the stewards of his companies. And here's a list that I'm particularly fond of because it's mine. Commitment to growth, accountability, transparency, confidentiality, encouragement, prayer, and stewardship. So this is what we're going to use as an exercise here, again, because I'm fond of it and I get to choose. But my volunteers, we're going to look at doing that. How do we change our culture? And in case you can't read it, it says, well, he did promise to change the corporate culture. The guy up on the pyramid getting ready to do human sacrifice. If you sacrifice your employees, you're probably going to change your culture. I'm going to try to do that in a way that maybe is a little bit less traumatic. But I want to do it in a way that achieves these things. We want to teach these values. Instead of just being a list on the wall that nobody remembers, it needs to be part of your company DNA. We want to instill those values, so it's what happens when nobody's looking. And we want to reinforce that and create a culture that is self-perpetuating. It becomes the new normal. And the way we're going to do that, I call tribal storytelling. So today, the tribe is the people that are around your business table. Instead of a campfire, you've got a meeting table. You've got a team, whether it's a departmental team, a whole company team, a division team, a nonprofit team, a church team. All of these things, they typically are going to be driven by meetings. And so this is switching tracks from saying, reality is we have to deal with this, to now here's a tool. Now, some of you may choose to implement this tool, some of you may not, and that's okay. Again, there's lots of change management techniques. All of them need to be part of your toolbox. But tribal storytelling is one of my favorite because of those last features of saying we need these things to be happening automatically. But it requires that you do things in a certain way, and as a leader, you be fully bought in. So as we look at this process, what I'm going to tell you is that if you're the leader, you can't assign this project to your HR department. You can't assign it to the supervisors of a department. You have to be the leader. And you have to demonstrate it, you have to teach it, and you have to buy into it until you're done. So here's the process. And it's important as we talk about this, the process is detailed and important, and the words are important because they do some good things to it. But we're going to ask for stories at every meeting. One of the team members will share a story, and then the supervisor will coach that story. And initially, it may need some additional critique, which is why we've got 3 people here. When you're doing this, you want to reward that storyteller initially. It's not something that we're going to start giving them $1,000 bills, but maybe a $5 Starbucks card, a $10 Starbucks card, to show that it's that important to you that this process works. And you got to support it from the top. And so my team up here, you need to pay particular attention right now because we're going to use these words exactly to do the process. You ask for a story at every meeting. This will be an all-hands meeting, a department meeting, a sub-team meeting, a leadership team meeting. Whatever you do at every meeting should have this. Well, Tim, they say, that's a lot of time. How can I afford to do that? Well, the real reason is because this is a 2-minute process. After you get it down, it doesn't take very long to make it happen, but it has tremendous results. So the way that you ask for a story as a leader, the team member says, I've got one. I'd like to share a story illustrating what integrity looks like to me, if that's the core value that you want to illustrate. 2 to 3 minutes about somebody else, and positive, or proactive and positive, and illustrates the embodiment of that core value. Ending, the bookend, I'd like to share a story about, that's what integrity looks like to me. So these are very important signaling phrases that will make a big difference to your organization. Then the final step is for the supervisor to coach the storyteller. You're going to have to refine this process in your organization to make it happen. But the key words are, I really liked your example of how Julie demonstrated core value of integrity. So positive reinforcement to start with. What would make it even, what they did to do that, you highlighted this good thing. And what would make it even be better is that you did it in 2 minutes instead of 15. Whatever the right answer is in the case of the coaching need, that you correct that. But it's a gentle correction. And if you've trained your team well, you won't have much in the way of correction. So common initial mistakes in this storytelling process is for it to be 15 minutes. You're going to have to teach and recognize the team that this is a pop-up. It's like a flash mob. You're going to be there and be out and be gone, but what you've done is you've helped teach those core values on the wall. Another common mistake is it's a reactive example instead of a proactive example. The perfect story is one where somebody did something before it was a problem. They called the customer before the customer noticed that there was an issue. And another common mistake for anyone starting is it's about themselves. And so we want this to be a positive reinforcement. What's the problem if it's about them? Any ideas? It's their perception. And this is a positive story. This is somebody saying, I did this really great thing and my boss should notice. What's the problem? They're going to think you're bragging, right? That's not what we're trying to achieve here. We want the boss to be bragging on the team member. So now we're going to practice. Thank you, volunteers. Give them another hand. And we have to remember Andres. Okay, so Andres, you are the creative type. Your job is going to be telling the first story. Grab that microphone. I'm going to give you this list, and I'm going to switch to the screen to help you know what to say. So don't panic, it's okay. Dan, you're going to be the supervisor. So once he's told the story, you're going to do this coaching process back here to the, I really liked your example. And again, I'm going to pull this up so you can see it. Don't panic about memorizing. And Nicole, you're going to be the CEO. You're going to be the one that critiques both of them because you're leading this team. Anything they left out, you're going to start out that way, okay? Pressure is on. So here's the list. So Andres, I want you to pick, you can do a real example, you can make up an example, I don't care. A real one is better, but I know it's short notice. Pick one of these core values, and let's run a story about that.
Okay, I just want to point out that my team just all looked at me and when they said artist, and so that's why I'm here. So thanks.
Thanks for throwing him under the bus.
Yeah. Also, the adrenaline really helps. I didn't sleep really well last night, and so it helps me wake up and pay attention more. So here I am.
Good. So you got a topic?
Yes.
Okay. So here's how you're going to do it.
Okay. I'd like to share a story illustrating what accountability looks like.
Is accountability really your topic? Accountability is an example.
Can we go back?
You
Let's
can choose any of these.
Commitment to growth.
Okay, commitment to growth.
So my brother, our family has been sort of, kind of in all different parts of the country for the past few years. My brother moved to Alaska, my sister was in California, and only until recently my brother moved back. And so I'm really just so pleased to have my brother back in New Mexico. And our family's all together again. And we've been just sort of struggling with what to do about like our ranch and everything, and because we have some land in New Mexico. And my brother took it upon himself to begin having family meetings. And as you can imagine, family meetings can be like scary. I don't know, maybe you guys all have them and that's normal for you, but to us, it's just kind of like, oh no, what if everyone gets mad and like we have like, all start fighting and stuff. But like we've had 2 family meetings so far, and they've just been really great. We've responded really well. Everyone's been super cooperative with each other, and we're actually getting stuff done. And I'm so thankful and pleased. Anyway, that's
So what's your last
story.
book in?
Oh, I'm sorry?
The final phrase to close out the story.
And that's what did I choose?
Commitment to growth.
Commitment to growth looks like to me.
Good. All right, hand the microphone to Dan. Okay, Dan, you're supervisor of Andre in this business table. What would you do to coach him from the perspective of the storytelling rules, which I know I've fire-hosed you all with?
Andre, so I really liked your example of your commitment to growth, especially because relationships is is everything, right? And it really sounds like you're committing not only to grow in your own personal life, but also your commitment to growth as a family. And I really liked how you highlighted how you're taking your own responsibility within the family to be able to make changes and adaptations, which I'm sure some of those would be uncomfortable. But again, I'd like to encourage you to continue to have that commitment to growth. What I think what might make it even better for you, Andres, and what might be more value to you is maybe to schedule a time for yourself to think how you can be more valuable to that commitment to growth to your family. What is it that you are good at that you can bring to the table that no one else can within your family, which can sharpen not only your own skills, but their skills?
Okay, thank you. Okay, Nicole, you're the one bringing this process to the organization.
Thank you.
Anything that you saw that you would coach both of them? So you're the outsider watching in the meeting room after the conversations.
Well, thank you.
What would make it better?
Thank you, Andres, for your vulnerability and your you seem to provide such a deep longing for a good relationship with your family, and for you to go in there anticipating, it sounded to me like you were anticipating the worst or something worse than what happened, and you then experienced likewise. And so it's really exciting to see that you were able to see the light in, the light after those experiences, and you can use those in the future meetings with your family. And just keep your head up, and I think, be as candid and real as you have been, and you're in the right track.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you. So as the trainer, I'm going to have a couple of other inputs just because I know you guys have been hit with a lot, and so I understand you're doing great.
Okay.
But a couple of things I would encourage you to think about for our next round, because you're not done yet.
Oh, good.
The first thing is, Andre, your story was a little bit long. So it's very common. Don't feel bad about it. That's okay. Dan, in your coaching, you coached him on a topic of what he could have done better. What I really want as a coach is I want you to coach the story. So an appropriate thing for you to have said, well, that was a little bit long. Because we're all busy, when you do things a little bit shorter would have been a better story, would have made it a better story. You did great at the first part of saying, this is what I really liked, and you highlighted these things. But the better part, which you coached, it was more personal than story related. So in this process, we're really talking about the process, not specifically. Okay, so now what we're going to do this again. But everybody, without moving physically, we're going to change roles. So Dan, you are now the creative type, whether you are or not. You're going to make up the next story. Nicole, you are now the supervisor. You're going to coach him once he's done. And Andre, you get to get even now with them.
It's about time.
It's about time. Okay, so let's go back. Dan, you're going to choose one of these core values and hopefully come up with a story, whether real or not. But again, toward the point of the organization of how did you do this in 2 minutes or less to reinforce this core value. Have you got one?
Yep.
Okay, here's this process. Verbal bookends.
I'd like to share a story illustrating what transparency means personally to me. So as a former pastor, a lot of times we had to come to a point in our lives where sharing our own life stories and our own experiences would actually help sharpen the other person and giving them the skill to know that they're not the only ones having to deal with that situation. That's what transparency looks like to me.
Okay, Nicole.
Okay, I appreciate your candidness today, and I think that was very short and simple and to the point, and I appreciate that you are, what's the word I'm trying to find here? You are efficient with your process to reach that goal. And
Okay. What would make it even better?
I think what would get you there even faster if you just focus on where you want to go And instead of, sometimes we get distracted with leaderships or certain other things that you have to deal with on a day-to-day in pastoral things. They distract you. I would continue to just focus on that goal and make that your priority.
Okay. Andres, as the overseer, what do you see? How could they have both done it better?
Well, I think you could have provided a little more examples in your storytelling. You talked about being transparent with your pastoral team and how you shared stories. I think I would have liked to see, as you're telling your story, what specific examples you could have, in that story, you could have given to me to really, or to your team as well, to really inspire and to ask your team to do the same.
Okay, so me as a coach, I get the final word. So here's my concern with the process we got now. So Dan, the problem was one of the common mistakes is your story was about you. So I know that when you're up here, that's the way it works, but again, it would have been better to tell the story about your coworker as opposed to yourself. Now, Nicole, your coaching was good. I mean, again, all this is good. We're fine-tuning at this point, but your coaching process dealt with his content, not with the story. So as a coach in this process, what you're doing is you're coaching how to tell the better story to fit into the parameters. 2 to 3 minutes about somebody else, all those things. And that's the way to make it work, do. Okay, well, normally I would do this one more time so that everybody has to do each of the roles, but my time is basically up. So I'm going to tell you just a couple of quick things and give our volunteers a round of applause. If you choose to implement this tribal storytelling process in your organization, what you have to do is build a pipeline. You have to train your senior team. You have to get them to practice so that we can do just what we did here today. What we did here is actually an example of the training process that you would do with the team, both first of all with the leadership team, then second of all as you roll out further into the organization. I encourage you to do it at all of your team meetings, all of your huddles. If you do this, for it to stick, it needs to be part of the DNA. It needs to be part of every single meeting, from the all hands to the department to maybe the administrative team by themselves. You need to practice it. You need to seed the process with volunteers. Now in the Army, they're called voluntold, right? So you're gonna have some people that you voluntold. They're going to have a few days to be thinking about it. Unlike my volunteers who had zero time and a brand new concept, your team is going to be trained. You're going to say, Sam, I need you to have a story for me in 2 days at the staff meeting. Sam will then have a chance to come up with a great thing, and you're going to reward Sam with a $5 or $10 Starbucks card or something that's appropriate and important to you and your team. And you have to model it. As the leader, you've got to start out doing it, training it, and then what happens? When is this going to be part of your DNA? How long is it going to take? At least 18 months. So if you roll out this process and say, I'm going to give up in 3 months, don't waste your time. You have to make this important, and it has to be part of your commitment to creating cultural DNA happening in the company. And so as a final encouragement, I just want to remind all y'all that what you're doing is important. I'm a big proponent of leverage, and your leverage to the companies, the people in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is what can change the world. We can't legislate morality. We can't do macro problems on a macro basis. Macro changes happen from the micro. Your companies are microcosms that can make a difference, not just for today, but for eternity. So thank you for doing that. I hope this has been enjoyable to you. Let's get started making a difference.